Good evening. My name is Joan Casey from Educational Advocates College Consulting, and we're excited to present tonight applying to college for students with learning disabilities and ADHD. I've been an educational consultant working with students with learning disability and ADHD, as well as other students for the past 18 years. And in our practice, about 40% of our clients have some kind of a learning issue, as well as issues such as anxiety and depression, which sadly we've seen a lot more of in the last few years since the pandemic. I'm also trained as a special education advocate and as an ADHD coach, and we use those strategies when we're working with students to help them through this journey. We have a team of 5 additional professionals, and one of them is my co-presenter tonight, Ildi Seke, and I'm going to have Ildi introduce herself.
Hi everyone, my name is Ildi Seke. Prior to joining Joan Casey's Educational Advocates Group, I worked at Boston College. I was coordinating services for students with learning disabilities and ADHD. I also worked at Northeastern Disability Services Office, and I also been a high school teacher out in California, a public school system where I taught journalism, AP, language and composition. And also in Massachusetts, I worked in a school at Landmark School that designed for students with learning disabilities.
So we have a very ambitious agenda tonight. Let me run through what we're going to cover very quickly. So first, we're going to talk about disclosing a disability and how to do that. Then Ildi will talk about standardized testing and the test optional movement and what that means. Reviewing different policies for applying for learning disability support programs in the college setting, and the importance of being able to describe how you learn when you're applying for such programs. Then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty a little bit of documentation, and then move on to the actual application process, such as essays, and other things to think about when you're applying to college. We'll review how you create a college list that will consider your academic support needs. We're going to touch briefly on four-year college alternatives, and then Ildi's will review the different levels of support and accommodations in the college setting. So first, when you're applying to college, should you disclose a disability or not? And I guess the first thing we should talk about is how do colleges view a disclosure? So, colleges are not supposed to consider a disclosure of a disability one way or the other. They're not under law supposed to hold it against you and not necessarily even consider it. But of course, college applications are read by human beings, and they are looking in many instances at many college at the student holistically. So, there are instances where disclosing may make a lot of sense. But the first thing that's important to know is sometimes people confuse explaining your disability and how it's affected your high school career with thinking, oh, if I tell them I have a disability, I'll be exempt from requirements. So that's where there's a difference from high school to college. So in high school, you're pretty much guaranteed an education. But in the college setting, the colleges do have a right to set requirements for entry as well as for requirements for once you're a student there. So those they may include that they want incoming students to have had a certain amount of level of foreign language. They may, for instance, for certain majors like business, require a certain level of math, or same for engineering. So, you do need to adhere to those college expectations. Now, one thing that we are often asked is, if I want to get accommodations and services once I'm a college student, don't I have to disclose? Well, yes, you have to disclose to the disability office, but not to admissions. So if you choose not to disclose to admissions, that's fine. You will still be able to get your accommodations once you're a college student. So let's get into some of the reasons why somebody might want to disclose. So the first is, think about the pandemic. The pandemic year was very difficult for a lot of students doing remote learning, and many students didn't earn as strong grades as they may have otherwise. So if you have a discrepancy in your academic record, that's a good reason sometimes to disclose your disability and explain. The second reason is maybe your test scores were impacted by your disability. So even though many schools are test optional now, there may be a couple of instances where a student is applying to a degree program in nursing or education. And because those fields have testing for the profession, sometimes those colleges don't exempt testing. So that would be an instance where if a student, let's say the student had dyslexia and their reading sub-score was much lower than their math, they might want to explain that in their admissions application. Likewise, if the student has a disciplinary, something in the disciplinary record that was perhaps impacted by their disability, maybe a student misread a social situation and that's part of their learning profile. That led to some kind of situation where they were suspended. And if that is going to go on their permanent record, they would want to explain that and also have their guidance counselor help them explain that. And then another situation that comes up quite frequently is that some students with a learning disability need to have a lot of tutoring after school, which prevents them from doing as many extracurricular activities as they might like to do otherwise. So that would be another reason to explain. So how do you do it? How do you disclose your disability? So one way is to have your school counselor write a statement in the counselor recommendation. So most students apply to college with a common application. It's a common application that is used to apply to over 800 colleges. And there's a section in there where counselors write a letter of recommendation for the student. So that can be a really good place for the parents and the student to work with the school counselor to figure out what should be said. You keep in mind that they cannot write about that without your permission, so you must work with them closely. Another nice place to disclose is the additional information section of the application that the student is writing. And there the student can write just a paragraph or so that explains their disability and whatever it is they want the college to know about them. They can do the same thing if they have an admissions interview, and it's a nice opportunity when you're having a personal conversation with an admissions counselor to say, you know, you're going to see my transcript and you're going to notice my 10th grade year was a little rough. I struggled with remote learning, but you can see my junior year and my early senior year, I'm doing really well, or something to that effect. But the main thing, you want to focus on how your disability impacts you and what you've learned, like what are the strategies you've adopted to help you improve your study habits, to, you know, enhance your learning, to improve your organization, and so on. You know, have you developed self-advocacy skills? And you want to convey either in that written statement or in that interview that you have done all these things and that you're really feeling prepared for college. So Ildi is going to talk about standardized testing now.
So yeah, most colleges went test optional during the COVID pandemic, and they are continuing this process. Basically, that means if you feel like your scores are good enough, then you can submit your scores. And if you feel like no, then the colleges do a holistic evaluation, and then they calculate your grades and the recommendation and the course rigor a little bit more, and your also your essay. It's a little bit different than test blind, like most of the UC California system. Test blind basically means if you submit your scores or not, they do not take a look at the scores at all. It's a good thing to keep in mind that some state policy require standardized testing scores to be submitted, such as Florida and Georgia. In some, the minority of schools like MIT reinstituted the standardized testing, but most of them are test optional. And the general conventional advice, if your scores fall below the middle 50% range of accepted students, then you may not want to submit your scores. As Joan mentioned earlier, if you have a really high math score or reading score, again, I would highly recommend checking with the admission, with the school's admission policies. But if they encourage you, you have a high math score and you're applying into a math-oriented major, then you may want to submit your scores, and vice versa for the English portion. Again, it would be very important to check with the institution and their admission. Also, colleges do not know whether a student taking the standardized testing with accommodations. So my recommendation is practice ACT and SAT, both of them, take the practice test, see which one you fare better, and take the test accordingly, and apply for accommodations early on. For College Board, you can apply as soon as you can, and because College Boards also does the AP and SAT, so those accommodations will carry over. For ACTs, you do have to apply as you register, but it's really good to keep in mind that the ACTs not change their policies, so they are more friendly towards students with learning disabilities, meaning that if you have your accommodations in your IEP or 504, they will automatically consider the student eligible for those accommodations. So again, apply early for accommodations. And the other thing that you might want to keep in mind is that many colleges, Disability or Accessibility Services Office, ask for verification of accommodations from standardized testings, either or. So it's a good idea to keep that letter or email for your records. College Boards is easier to obtain than ACTs. ACT may take a while to submit those verification forms if you end up losing them. On the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about documentations. Many colleges require your documentations to be within 3 to 4 years. So it's very important to get the updates. If you are on an IEP, the federal government mandates the schools to test you every 3 years. So make sure you do that. If you are on the cusp of being 16 years of age, you may want to wait until you turn 16, because then clinician can use the WAIS, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test, versus the WISC, which is the cognitive portion of the testing. And then the WAIS is normed on adults, while the WISC is normed on children, and colleges do prefer the adult norms. Also, it's really important to know that the laws do change once you go from high school to college, right? So you're no longer covered by IDEA, which is an educational law. You will be covered by the 504 and the ADA, also known as ADAAA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So while I'm mentioning this, because the IEP, as the individualized educational program, as they call it, and the 504 plan do not carry over to college. So I will talk about later on accommodations and the difference between accommodations you receive in college versus some modifications you may have received in high school. And then colleges actually will look at your functional impact on learning. So the very important part for students, if you are listening to this, is to really be familiar and learn to advocate for yourself. Meaning, read your evaluations, ask questions, know how you learn, what services you are receiving in high school, and be able to articulate that once you go to college. Once you get to college and you request accommodations, it will be a student-initiated process, meaning the student has to initiate it. And it's an interactive, meaning you will have to talk to the specialist and explain the services you have used and you want to receive in college. In the next slide, I am including some of the questions that you may, sample questions you may want to look at and see if you can answer them on your own about how you learn. At Boston College, we always knew when parents filled out the intake form, it was quite evident. So we always had students to sit down and explain what they wrote down for their accommodation needs. Also be wary of cutting and pasting the clinician's recommendations onto your intake forms. We have seen those as well. Those are recommendations and they often not applicable to the college setting. And from here, Joan will actually talk about the common application and the rules of a college essay.
So, students will often ask, should I write my college essay about my disability? And the first thing that we want to say is we want students to write whatever it is they want to write about. But there is some advice in some ways to think about the essay. So the first thing a student wants to think about is what is the college already going to know about me? What's going to be obvious? So, things like your grades, your test scores, your family background, things that your teachers and counselors will say about you, your list of activities. So they'll know those things. They won't necessarily know why those things are meaningful to you, however. So, what you want to do is you want to think about the qualities and the characteristics about you that make you special, that make you you. And think about, this is your opportunity to talk directly to the admissions counselor in a personal way and tell them a heartfelt story. So, there are some examples here on qualities and characteristics that students wanted to get across about themselves. And, really the best essays are about everyday moments, about small things, and that somebody will read and say, wow, this seems like a really great kid, and so back to, should you write about your disability or not? I just wanted to share a quick story about a student whom I worked with in the past year, who really wanted to write her essay about, her journey through high school and how well she did, and how, despite her disability and starting out a little rocky in ninth grade, how she really developed self-advocacy skills. So we started to brainstorm. And one of the things about an essay is it has to be about a quality about yourself, but you have to have a story to bring that quality to life. And she was really struggling with coming up with a story that seemed interesting. So I said, what, let's set this aside. Let's set this idea of writing about your disability aside for a minute. Let's just brainstorm some other things. And it turned out she had been a big advocate in her high school for National Honor Society. So previously, students that were not in honors and AP classes were not eligible because they didn't have a high enough weighted GPA. So she took this on. She did a lot of research of how other schools in the area handle it. She presented before boards, and long story short, after several months of hard work, she got it approved that all students with a certain grade point average, regardless of whether they were in honors and AP classes, would be in National Honor Society. Well, she ended up disclosing her learning disability very briefly in that essay, but it didn't start out being an essay about her disability, and it ended up being a very compelling and very interesting essay. So just a little advice there. Here are some other things you want to think about when you're applying. So one of the things that we do with students when we're working with them is we do a college readiness assessment. So asking them lots of questions about how they learn, how they study, the kinds of support they're receiving at the high school during the day, the kinds of support they're receiving through tutoring, or any other outside executive function coaches or the like, and even considering the things that parents do for them, whether that's reminding them to put their medication by the orange juice, to take it in the morning, the students not taking it themselves, or refilling their prescriptions, to maybe a parent is reviewing and editing the students' papers. So all of that is support, and it needs to be replaced in the college setting. And Ildi will get into this a little bit more later, but there's some things that a college is not going to do for a student. So anything that the student needs to learn and become independent on, we want them to start doing that during high school. So once they have an assessment and the student starts narrowing down their college list, they should start to talk to the Office of Disability Services or Accessibility Services to find out, are they offering what I need for support? But then beyond that, going to college, certainly your academic support needs are critical in the college setting, but there's a lot of other things that you want to think about too. So you want to think about the overall campus culture, if it's a good fit for you. Are you shy and maybe a little introverted? Well, you probably don't want to go to a school that has a huge Greek system and that dominates the social scene. And, you know, you want to make sure that they offer majors that are interesting to you. So sometimes we have students that will say, oh, you know, well, you know, they'll tell us they like the college that they visit, and we'll say, great, you know, which majors they're interested in, and they'll like, oh, I forgot to look at the majors. So, you know, that's really critically important. You want to make sure that they have things you feel excited about. Likewise, that if you've done things in high school, sports or whatever, drama, theater, you want to make sure that the college is going to offer the things that you want to continue doing. And then finally, you want to make sure you meet their academic profile. So, you know, if you are a student that's taken some honors classes and maybe a few AP, then you probably want to go to a college that's in line with that. Likewise, if you've been in mostly college prep classes, you probably, you know, don't want to apply to a college that expects that you've taken a lot of AP classes. And, you know, your school counselor, a consultant like us, can help you figure out which is which among those colleges. Creating a college list, you know, there's a lot of great resources out there to help you do this. So one is a book called the K&W Guide for Learning Disabilities, and Princeton Review publishes it. It's not a complete guide because the way it works is the authors of the book send out a survey and they put anyone in the book who returns the survey. So there may be other colleges out there that would meet your needs that are not in the book, but it's certainly a great place to start. The first book listed here, From High School to College, Steps to Success for Students with Disability, is a really great book to help you think about transitioning from the high school setting to the college setting. And the collegesupports.com is a great website where you can get some detailed information for a fee. You have to join, you know, for a year. And, you know, College Board Big Future is just a general search site where you can put in parameters and help you come up with a college list. I want to point out fairtest.org. So Ildi already talked about test optional. This is a website that provides detailed information on the specific testing requirements of each college. And then on the right, we list a whole bunch of things that you might want to think about that you may not have thought about, you know, in addition to your learning support needs. So, you know, you want to go to a college that offers study abroad or that has a great program to connect you with alumni to do internships, that have really strong advising and mentoring programs, perhaps. You want to make sure the peer group that you have things in common with the other students, that you feel like you connect with them. And that's where visiting comes in and talking with students on campus. So those are just a few of the things that you want to keep in mind. And then, you know, there's a lot of pressure in our society that, you know, you should go to college the September after you graduate from high school. And yes, in fact, most high school seniors will apply to college and they'll get in places and they'll maybe choose one college. But that doesn't mean you have to go right away. So students decide to take a year in between high school and college for a wide variety of reasons. Maybe you feel like you've been working so hard that you need a little break. Maybe you want to get a little perspective, like you're not really sure what you want to study and you feel like doing an internship for a year or doing some traveling could really help you see the world and have a better understanding of yourself. And still other students, you know, realize they have academic skills that they still need to work on. You know, maybe they just so busy during the school year that they haven't become as independent as they know they need to be before they go off to college. So they may do some kind of a academic program like a Landmark College Bridge program or one-year program, or you know, locally in the Boston area, there's a program called Semester Off. And there are programs like this all over the country. And then other students maybe will choose to go to community college for 2 years or technical college. Others will decide that maybe college isn't the right thing for them at this time, and they may enter a building or construction trade, a culinary program. And there's so many other kinds of things that people can do after high school. So Ildi's going to talk about accommodations in college.
Yeah, so the key concept to keep in mind that the language of the law in high school is that you're entitled to a high school education. You're no longer entitled to a college education, but you are provided equal access, right? So basically means the student must meet the objective of the institution and the curriculum as well with reasonable accommodations. And you see a list here are all those that the most commonly seen reasonable accommodations that do transfer over. I'm not gonna touch on every single one, but highlight a few, especially reduced distraction or distraction reduced testing. Because it varies from school to school. Some colleges provide a testing center, some do not. Some have private rooms like Northeastern. Some you may be in a school with a students of 20 like BC, where you're taking exams with 20 different students. Note-taking services are often not referred as note-taking assistants. There is a huge movement of moving away from peer note-takers into technology. Most commonly ones are Glean. Glean is an audio note-taking software that does an incredible job of recording the lecture that you can manipulate, and it's also transcribes at the same time. The last one I want to touch upon is foreign language waivers, because that's also differ from school to school. Some schools, it's a lot easier to get a waiver than others. At BC, for example, it's quite difficult. So if you had a substitution in high school the whole 4 years, then it's easier to get one. But if you have taken high school languages, then Boston College will ask you to attempt it at college before you can even apply for a waiver. On the next slide, here are some of the what we call modification of the curriculum that you may be receiving in high school, but they no longer carry over unless it's medically necessary. And then if you have a medical issue or a disability that necessitates a flexibility attendance, then that's a different discussion than for learning disabilities and ADHD. The two things I really want to highlight is study guides. A lot of high school students are used to getting their study guides. You no longer get that in college. So as you're transitioning into your senior year, it's a good idea to practice creating your own study guide and review it with your teacher and see how well you did, because you're going to rely heavily. And a lot of students come into our tutoring center or academic coaching center like in distress because they don't know how to create a study guide. The other one is extended deadlines. Again, you will not get extended deadlines on assignments because you get a syllabus right away at the beginning of the semester, which will list every single assignment and due dates. And then colleges will, if they have an academic coach services, which I will touch upon later, then maybe it's a good idea to make those appointments and help you plan out your schedule. And then I'll also touch upon later that a lot of colleges, if you feel like you're overwhelmed coming into your freshman year, they may recommend underloading and taking less courses than it's required, and then you can make up the deficiencies over the summer. Again, that's a great discussion to have with the Disability Services Office, which is in the next slide, is to make sure you contact, figure out the process, and how to secure accommodations early on, right? Even once you get accepted, start Googling and start researching. Quickly to note for parents that the FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which transfers over once the student turns 18 and enters post-secondary education, it transfers over to the student. So that means students will need to give consent to the disability services specialist to discuss the disability-related issues with the parent. So again, here comes the importance of student-initiated. Again, as I mentioned earlier, double check that your evaluation is up to date, that it was done while you were in high school. And then double check if the colleges offer pre-orientation for students with learning or disabilities, because that you might be able to go on campus and figure out the resources early on, which is a huge bonus. And the next slide, I'm briefly gonna touch upon the 3 levels of services. There's a basic, the coordinated and structured, and I have some examples on the slides. Basic services basically is the what the ADA, on the next slide, what the ADA requires. It can vary tremendously from schools, but what it means, you have one contact person, the disability services or the accessibility services office, and they provide the basic accommodations. Again, it's student initiated, it's included in the tuition, and they will not gonna go and track you down like if you requested your accommodation or have you submitted your notification letters to your professors. But again, this can be a level different. If the institution is smaller, you're going to a school that's less than 2,000 students. Again, this might look different than if you're going to a college of 20 to 40,000 students. But on the next slide, what I want to highlight is that colleges do provide academic support to all students. That includes a writing center or a math center for tutoring or academic coaching or supplemental instructions. This can be in some colleges under in one building, under one umbrella. In some colleges, it could be in different departments. So the math tutoring might be in the math department. So you have to figure out, most writing centers are in the library. So for students who just use the basic accommodation in high school, along with the services that the colleges provide, it may be enough. But if you're one of those students who need a little bit more involved support, then you might want to look into coordinated services. That means the college is going above and beyond what the ADA requires from them. So you may have more than 2 to 3 specialists at the school who works with students. You may have opportunities to engage in executive functioning workshops. They may have academic coaching, and again, emphasizing on the fact that, again, students must seek to help and follow through. And again, this is included in your tuition because it goes through the Disability Accessibility Services Office. But if you're one of those students who need the structured support, especially you're transitioning into freshman year, then you may want to explore programs that goes above and beyond the Disability Services Office. Now, these structured programs are usually fee-based and they have a separate application to get involved, but they are very comprehensive. So they may offer 2 to 3 times you meet with an executive functioning coach. They may have very specialized tutoring services. And that person, in this case, may reach out to the student and check on the students and hold them accountable. Again, it depends on the schools and it's worth to check because the application to these programs can be competitive and they're usually involve an interview process. So again, it's a good idea to practice self-advocating. And on the next slides, I don't think it's in there. Yeah, the next slides, I talk about the different applications. So what do I mean different applications? So for example, Northeastern's, the Learning Disability Program, you have to be accepted to Northeastern first, and then you can apply to this fee-based structured program. But there are schools like University of Arizona SALT program or the Curry College PALS program or the American University Learning Services program when you apply at the same time with the application into the school. So again, check with these programs if something that you really want to be part of. Make sure that you know when the application is due. I think, yes, so the classic mistakes to avoid. I love this slide the most because these are really classic mistakes I have seen in my past 10-year experience in higher education. Not getting your testing updated. Believe it or not, I had students who came into the office requesting accommodations on a 5th and 6th grade evaluation. While you may not change cognitively much, your impact of your disability in your education does change tremendously. So colleges will not accept evaluation that goes back to your 5th and 6th grade. And why it's a classic mistake is because these evaluations, as you know, can take a long time, can take a month or so to get the appointment, to get the write-up before you can initiate the request for accommodations. Waiting too long for request your SAT, ACT testing accommodations, another one. Again, for, as I mentioned, for College Board, apply early right away. ACT makes it a lot easier now to get your accommodation, so apply early and for these accommodations. Students not being honest with themselves, that's a big one too. I had so many students who say, oh, I don't need accommodations, I'm going to try to do it on my own when they come into college. Now, remember, while you're in high school, your life is completely structured from the wake up till you go to bed, right? Your every hour is planned. Colleges are not like that. No one's waking you up. No one's making you to eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner. You don't go to class every single day unless you have a schedule that way. So not having a support in place can really academically hurt you. So I had students come in to me sophomore year regretting not setting up accommodations as a freshman. Choosing the right program is important too. If you are one of those students who heavily relied on your accommodations and you know that you will need a structured program, then make sure you look at the colleges that you're applying to and that they offer the comprehensive programs for you. Ignoring advice, again, I have seen plenty of times. I have students coming in and they're enrolled in 5-6 courses, and sometimes the advice is to come in taking less courses, which is underloading, right? So instead of if it's a semester course, then instead of 5 courses, take 4. A lot of colleges will support you on that. So again, as I mentioned earlier, it's an important conversation to have with the Disability Services Office, meaning if I end up taking 4 courses instead of 5 and I'm deficient in credits, what's the process of making that up? Is my tuition for the summer covered for that, so I don't have to pay extra? So these are important questions to ask from the Disability Services Office. And then the last one is for parents. Please let your children do themselves what they can, especially as their senior year comes. Have them self-advocate, have them call their clinicians to refill medication, because those are the skills they really will need once they enter college. So they have to initiate the services for themselves, and they have to self-advocate for their own needs. And this is it for me.
Yeah, so we really appreciate your time and attention tonight, and please get in touch with us if you have any additional questions about anything we covered today. We really appreciate the time, and we love working with our students and helping them on this journey and finding the right colleges for them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.